Hello, and welcome to the Say Yes to Holiness podcast. I'm Christina Simmons, your host, and today I have a most wonderful guest. I'm super excited to have her here, especially because she has another book that's coming out, and I really love her writing, but I also love how it is that she inspires and is encouraging us in our own lives of discipleship through the characters that she shares and writes about. So Rhonda Ortiz, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Christina. I appreciate it.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. So I could do your whole bio and everything, because you're an award-winning novelist and tons of accolades and awards and everything. But probably the biggest one, let me guess, thing you're most proudest of would probably being wife and mom.
I am. I've been married for going on 19 years. My husband, Jared, and I have 6 kids, ranging from age almost 13 to 1-year-old. And yeah, that's definitely my biggest accomplishment. Absolutely.
Oh, well, before we jump into talking about your latest book, I wanted you to just briefly share with our listeners a little bit about your own faith journey and kind of how you came to be where you are today.
All right, I'd love to. So I am a convert. I grew up in the Churches of God based in Anderson, Indiana, and some of you may know that. I'm a native Oregonian. I went to school in Maryland. And while in Annapolis, Maryland, at a small school called St. John's College, not a Christian school, despite the name, but happens to produce a few converts every year. So I was a senior. I became a Catholic. I met my husband during that time. I was in RCIA when I met my husband. He's a cradle Catholic and a revert. And we got married. We ended up living in DC for several years because my husband was getting his PhD. He's a theologian and a professor, and I'm in his office, which accounts for the massive amount of books. Behind me. My office has lots of books too, but his is it's pretty impressive. And yeah, we had a bunch of kids. Not long after my oldest was born, I began writing fiction. I also wrote nonfiction. I wrote for CatholicMom.com. That's where I got my start in publishing. I wrote for a number of other places, just articles and that sort of thing. And then eventually, steadily working on fiction through all of this. And then eventually hit upon the idea for Molly Chase. That was the first full-length manuscript that I had written. I have other things I've written, but the manuscript for In Pieces was the first one that I thought, oh gosh, this is going to go into the world, So I did my due diligence. I wrote and wrote and wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Not long ago, I say not long ago, it's actually been a while. It feels like not long ago.
Right.
I'm a fully professed lay Dominican order of preachers. Since I'm a writer, that's my preaching is through the written word. I was fully professed in 2019. So that's why I say it's actually not, it has been a while.
Well, you toss in a pandemic in the midst of that, and it seems really long.
It's true. It's true. And I have a lot of kids, that keep me on my toes. So, time, what is time?
Well, you made mention of Molly Chase, and that's the series where I came to know of your writing. In Pieces was the first one, and that's the one. We got another book that's coming out. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But could you kind of share about the series itself, because it's not just this next one that's coming out. There's a couple of more that are too. So it's obviously a series. So kind of talk about who Molly is and how she kind of came to be.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I can show everybody the covers. This is In Pieces right here. And this, get the little sticky note off of this. This is Adrift, which comes out on the 8th, on the Feast of St. Dominic. That is course intentional. So the series it's what's called a continuity series, where you have one big story that's being told over several books, and each, it's like a mini series if you think on television, right? There's a big story arc, but then each episode is kind of a lengthy, story in of itself. And it's set in 1793 Boston, and it's about a woman who whose father commits suicide, and she discovers the body, and she's having a horrific time, obviously, following these circumstances. And on the outset, it seems like a very simple love story. It's actually there's more going on than just simply the romance line. She has a childhood friend, who's as close as a brother. That's always a wonderful trope, and there is their love story. But it was interesting. In the writing of it, I realized that it was doing some really interesting things that I was not expecting it to when I was composing it. And one of those being that this is a story that doesn't stop with the courtship. It's not a stereotypical courtship story, or like a typical, not stereotypical, a typical courtship story with courtship story genres, conventions. It's spanning into marriage and hopefully into heaven, is what this is a heavenly minded book. So in any case, it's kind of a family drama, society drama, religious drama, very rooted in the situation in the late 1800s in Boston. There's espionage, there's a political suspense. There's quite a bit going on in the book, and I would kind of say it's kind of a hodgepodge between, I would say, like Kristen Lavin's Daughter and Glasgow's North and South, and maybe like a little Tolstoy's War and Peace kind of smushed in, but then also very popular and very accessible in terms of reading. It's an American story. It's a very readable story. So
I can attest to that. I have absolutely fallen in love with the characters.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Makes me so happy.
I would have married Josiah, and it's something where we've had all boys, and the advice we have always told them has been, what you want to have happen is that you want to have good friendships, good deep friendships with, those of, your own sex and the opposite sex. And then someday you want to be having a really deep conversation. And then you look across the table at each other and you just go, and why is it that we're not considering spending the rest of our lives doing this together? And it's your best friend. And so I so identified with that, but then I also recognize, the great struggle that there is. And particularly what you brought in, too, was a little bit of a class differential as well.
Yeah.
Of where, because of Josiah's family and the circumstances that had happened with his own father's passing, then you have a situation of where it's almost like, Molly is almost out of his reach. So it's kind of, so a little bit of that going on too. So I thought that was absolutely brilliant. But then, of course, he himself is, so successful and driven that he has already moved himself up, societally. And so he's able to provide what it was that she would expect, from what her parents had. So that was but then you had the nice little twists in there, and I'm not going to spoil it for people who haven't read in pieces. But go and do, because it is such a nice intersection of the realities of the time and the moral and ethical dilemmas that people had. In particularly, how do you make a living, and do we allow certain things to happen, and do we benefit from it? And but that being said, you don't shy away from any of those things. And so I guess my question would kind of be, is that a result of where the characters took you, or were you also kind of maybe trying to help readers on their own kind of journey, themselves?
Right. It's interesting with I think Josiah would actually be, so I mean, Molly is the title character of the series. The story is ultimately Molly's. But there's so many other characters and so many different things that feed into this. But I think Josiah, actually, since you brought him up, is actually a really good example. So because I could talk to the writing process a little bit. When I had written, when I wrote, so it was like a piece of it. Josiah, very driven, loves this girl, wants to make up. His family, as you mentioned, as he alluded to, you know, in the backstory, he's lost his father at the Battle of Penobscot during the Revolutionary War. They had already lost, you know, his father had already, their fortune had already been kind of dwindled down. Their family money had already dwindled down because of the blockade, because of the closing of Boston Harbor. And so he finds his father dies, and his mom and he and his sister are kind of, you know, in tough circumstances. And then so the Chase family, Molly's family, takes them in. Mr. Chase and Josiah's father, Captain Robber, were good friends. And so they kind of grow up under the same roof, right? But, you know, but now they're in like you say, there's a differential, you know, Mrs. Robb being Mrs. Robb. Sarah Robb is a very proud woman, says, I will not take anything for free. I will cook for you. I will work for you. You know, we can live here. Thank you. But, you know, she doesn't want to, and that's her to a T. So, and so, you know, so there is this kind of, you know, playing catch up a little bit, and then also just having a childhood relationship. Well, because he's so driven, at one point in his past, he was investing in sugar. He worked on a merchant ship when we open up in pieces, and historically, you know, ship owners would give their sailors, and these were boys. I mean, they were boys. They were teenage boys. They'd give them a little money and for their own private ventures, and so they would invest, and then they would bring it home and they would sell it, and they would build up a little, you know, profit this way. And so Josiah does this, and he's very good at it. But one of the things he does is he invests in sugar down in Martinique, you know, and down in the Indies, and then, you know, and he makes money. He makes a good deal of money this way. And it was funny because, you know, and then he stops investing in sugar because of slavery at some point. And when I was drafting it early on, and I started realizing, I think at one point I was like, wait a second, this is sugar. It's like, this is the like, sugar drove the slave trade. Rhonda, you can't let him get off with like a couple lines here, Rhonda girl. Like, you have to like actually stop and make this important, because this is bad. He did something bad. And so then I'm like, okay, well, you know, I had to explore this, you know, in my imagination. Well, what happened? Why did he have a change of heart? What is he doing with this money now that he's had this change of heart? Like, how is he going to seek out resolution? And what's interesting is that in pieces, as different characters were developed over the process of this, is that there are characters who can provide the way forward for him in a way that makes amends and is bringing some good out of a very, very, very bad, you know, out of evil, out of really horrific evil. And so, you know, in the way only God's providence can. So it's, it was interesting. So yes, you know, you're right. I mean, you look at this and I think like, I can't just let my characters get off, you know, like get away with doing something and then just kind of like, oh, and then he had, you know, and da 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 da. No, we have to actually look at this, you know, this is historically, it's like, what is this historical fact? He traded in sugar. Sugar's bad. Sugar drove the slave trade. Like, this is bad. So anyway, and so yeah, for forcing my characters to look at those things, I think it's just honestly, it's just, for me, a lot of that is just looking at just even the factual things of the facts of this or that help me root me in the problem, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
Yeah, and it's beautifully done because, we were talking before we got on, and I think it's beautifully done in that, yeah, there's some seriousness that's here, but it doesn't overwhelm the story in the sense of we come to understand the characters and their story is developed because of that situation
Right.
versus the situation then drives the characters, and that's not what's
Hmm.
going on at all. And that's beautiful. Something that I very much appreciate about the relationship between Molly and Josiah, but also Molly's own maturation. And by the time she kind of, comes to realize, hey, this is the guy. Um, there's like once she realizes it, there's no doubt in the sense of he's principled, he is, a man of conviction, and her willingness to follow him. He's I mean, potentially he's going to be head of household, and her willingness to be able to be obedient to that. And I was just like, I mean, because she's headstrong, but not in such a way that she's going to violate that relationship. And that's something that's beautifully written there that is very subtle. And so I was wondering, one of the things that God does for us is similar, of where he tells us what we need to be about, but he doesn't force us. But then when we're obedient to it, when we freely give our will to it, then great things happen. And you see the same
Hmm.
thing kind of happening in Josiah and Molly. But was that intentional on your part as you were kind of writing, their love story?
I think they had to get there, and I think this is when we say like, if we're looking at, so all great romances are a figure of, or a typology of Christ in the church.
Mhm,
And so if you, and in particular, this is also really interesting. In the romance genre, I'm going to speak as a writer now. There are conventions, right? Not tropes. Tropes are a little different, but there's conventions that have to be met in certain types of stories. So if you have a love story, one of the conventions that has to be met is that one of the lovers sacrifices himself or herself for the good of the other
mhm,
without hope of return.
mhm,
And so this is so, and it doesn't have to be necessarily, physically sacrificing, but
mhm,
there's something that is being submitted and laid down, out of love so that the other person can be good. So so I think a classic example, this is always the easiest one, is Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darcy goes once he learns about Lydia and Wickham's elopement, right?
mhm,
Mr. Darcy goes to London and confronts Wickham, which is, and bribes him
mhm,
into marrying this girl, and this is completely loathsome to him in every way,
mhm,
shape, or form. But he does it for Elizabeth, and he tries to hide it. He doesn't want
mhm.
Elizabeth knowing that it was him.
Right.
And it's Lydia who slips and mentions
Mhm,
that Mr. Darcy had been in her wedding.
mhm,
And so anyway, so you have this, um, so there's always this convention. And so with when I was writing this, I thought, okay, so In Pieces in particular, because In Pieces has a courtship arc, the entire series as a whole is the story of a marriage.
mhm,
But the first book is the courtship piece. Um, there's a coming of age, and the respect. See, the Josiah has to learn how to respect Molly, both provide for her, which I think he was always willing to do, but they were childhood friends, and he's a
mhm.
tease, and he has to learn to stop teasing and to
Yep.
start treating her with more respect, that he would show, and then and to really honestly like value what she has and what she's bringing. And then Molly has to learn to respond to that respect. And so the whole arc of In Pieces for her is like figuring out, like, this is not the man I used to know. There's something has changed.
Mhm,
And slowly the long-standing friendship, or this kind of frenemy sort of,
mhm,
experience developing into a mature affection and mutual respect that that allows for that dynamic at the end, which is her being able to enter into a union with him, on an equal ground and like with an equal point of respect. But the reason I'll just finish my thought with this is that convention in Pieces, the way that convention is met is for him to let her fight her own battle.
Right.
There's a point in the book where he is ready.
Yeah.
He's ready to do all the things to make everything better, and it's not his to fight. And he's like I say, he's driven. He's he's a go-getter, and he can't. It's not his, and he has to learn to wait. And so that's how it plays out, and without giving away any of the spoilers. And so so it's interesting. You say, is that intentional? Well, yes, actually, it's even written into the way we write love stories. And if it's a really good sacrifice, it figures Christ in the church even more. The bigger the sacrifice on the part of that character, the better the parallel to what it is that we're drawing.
So you would probably agree with the statement that all romance stories echo the great love story of Christ himself.
I think so. So, the closer they are to hitting what is the meaning of true love. There are love stories of all sorts. There are really perverse ones. There are any number of ones I would not recommend in any way, shape, or form. But like the better one starts, looking at the deeper you delve into what is the true nature of love in story form, the closer you get.
Right.
So
it images all of what is good and true and beautiful. So therefore that perversity, that ugliness, those what are quote love stories, you can immediately see they're not, because it is a distortion of it. And so
I think it's like there's shadows there, right? You can see, you could pull out pieces, and it's like, I know you're grasping at something. There's something eternal that you're grasping at in this. And then I think in terms of from the author side, the formation of my imagination is going to shape the formation of my life and of my heart through prayer is going to shape my imagination so that the stories play out in the way that hopefully God wants them to play out. I'm not saying it's holy writ, but I just lost my thing here. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's, certainly the more I can conform myself to Christ, the more that my imagination is going to play out certain scenarios.
Well, the Inklings, particularly Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, they desired to be able to write fiction and create worlds which were reflective of the eucatastrophe, this great love, and being able to have people recognize the transcendent in the midst of the fiction. And I thoroughly being a historian as well as student of theology as well, I love the intersection of the history and the plots that you have. So it's almost like not a whodunit, but there's also this underlying story of the greater things that are going out around in American history at this time, and most people aren't aware of that. So I appreciate you bringing to light some of the things that aren't as well known to most people about our nation's past.
It's a fun time to write. The 1790s are a wild time in American history, and we don't look at them in school, or hardly at all. We may have heard about that guy Genet, but otherwise,
or the shores of Tripoli. You might have heard about the first marine landing going on, but usually you hear about the into the Constitution Convention, the ratification, and then we jump from there to the Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah.
It's
You
like,
might mention something about the Alien and Sedition Acts, somewhere in
right.
there. Poor John Adams,
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's oh no, it's a wild time. And I think what's what trying to convey this in fiction and then bring my characters into the drama of this, because we talk about this as a love story, right? But there's a lot going on in this book.
Yeah.
And trying to convey the precarious situation that the United States was in following the ratification of the Constitution, because we're asserting our autonomy as a
Yes.
nation. And what's the first thing that happens? And the story opens with this is the war between England and France, the French Revolutionary Wars. And all of a sudden now, we get this guy, Genet, he comes in my book. I put Josiah right where he lands.
Yes.
And he comes in and is like, oh, you owe us a favor. Come fight for us, Americans. Right. And he starts recruiting them without permission from the government. And you're like, that's a really big deal, because if you fight on the side of France, it means you have Britain against you. Maybe that's a decision that the government should make. But no, that's not Genet. Genet wanted this to happen. And I, of course, put Genet and Josiah in the same place at the same time, and just trying to bring some context to what is ultimately, I think, a very personal story, of a couple and their family and friends. But
very John Jakes of you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I'm a huge fan. John Jakes, Kent Family Chronicles, North and South, all of those. And so it's a beautiful way to be able to give context and bring all of what people know or might not know into enlivening the story. Speaking of story, we already kind of alluded to it about the fact that the next book, Adrift, is going to be coming out on August 8th. You said that was a date you intentionally chose, August the 8th. Put the connection for people who might have missed it with the fact of, so just kind of share about why it's significant for you.
So, well, August the 8th is the feast of Saint Dominic, and I am a lay Dominican. So, so it's funny, we actually, we were batting around the release dates, and my preference, I was like, it's a summer book. This is a summer read. Adrift. It's about, it's summer, they're getting married. I mean, I don't know. This is in every way, shape, and form. This book happens over the course of the summer. It's a book. It's a book that needs to release in summer. And I was like, well, the earlier the better. And of course, Chrism Press was like, yeah, we have an editorial schedule. Like, it only goes so fast, Rhonda.
Right.
And so we settled on August, and then I said, well, how about August 8th? Since it's the Feast of Saint Dominic. And so everybody agreed, and that was what we chose. And so, yeah, so what's really funny and interesting is that as I was piecing together the timeline in this book from, the days the characters do this on such and such day, and they do this on such and such day, and everything like that, is that Molly and Josiah get married on August 8th. So it's their anniversary too. It's their wedding date too. So I don't think I've actually mentioned that. So anyway, so it was just one of these little internal, Rhonda knows this. It's not in the book. I didn't date.
You heard it here first, everybody.
I haven't mentioned it anywhere else, actually.
Here we go. True. Trivia for people,
I know, like when you want to really get deep into the lore, you'll have to come look up this podcast.
I love it. And I have to say, I was lucky enough. I've got it in advanced copy. And I love it. It's really great. Particularly the continuing complexity and growth of the characters. And particularly some of the minor characters have kind of taken center stage a little bit more. And I was wondering what prompted that to happen as you're continuing?
Oh gosh. I mean, how weird do you want me to get? Fiction authors are strange. Well, there's this, I was writing and this one character started talking to me.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
like, normally when people talk to you, you go to the doctor and they,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
but instead, when you write fiction, this is a good sign.
Mhm.
So it was interesting as I was developing in pieces under Chrism Press's, editorial guidance. Um, the character of Eliza Hall was one who had started to emerge, and in pieces we don't know we meet her, but we don't know her name until the
Right.
very end. So I will not give too
Mhm.
much away, but she was a character whose voice became distinctive, and she asked me to tell her story, which
Mhm.
sometimes happens. And it was funny because I was like, well, what am I going to do with this, because this is Molly's story, and too many points of view makes for a very muddled story. How does this work? But it ended up, after a lot of wrestling with, okay, Eliza's story wrote itself. Okay, that's
Mhm.
usually a good sign. I mean, it really just went down,
Mhm.
I wrote it. And then I was struggling with trying to figure out Molly's side of it. And what ended up happening in Adrift, and readers of Adrift will be able to see this, is that there's two parallel stories. One is set in Boston with Molly, with Josiah, with the Boston crew, and then Eliza and another character, Antoine de Laurent, go to Philadelphia, which at the time was the nation's capital. So and so they go, and the story goes back and forth between the two settings, and then eventually those stories merge, and the
Mhm.
story answers that we're looking for, the grand
Yeah.
finale
Mhm.
is together. But
Right.
the two lines come together. And anybody who knows their Philadelphia history, the story is set in the summer of 1793,
Mhm.
which was not intentional, because I had already set it in 1793 with the
Right.
start of the war when I wrote In Pieces. And so then when it went to writing Adrift,
Mhm.
and then I had this development with Eliza, and didn't know what to do with her. And then she was ending up in Philadelphia. I'm like, what's going on? And then I look at Philadelphia. 1793 is the year of the yellow fever pandemic.
Yeah.
And so yes, that enters into the book as
Mhm.
well. Not that anybody here wants to know anything more about hear anything else about pandemics, but
Well,
this
I
one is a historical fact.
I do think it's important for us to remember that, pandemics have happened throughout all of history.
Yeah.
And they do have an impact and influence. So a little bit of fun for you.
Mhm.
But uh, what actress would you like to be in the leading roles? To do the limited streaming series or the feature length movie of the Molly Chase books?
Oh my goodness. I have yet to find anybody who would be Molly. The
Okay.
closest I found is a contemporary, it's not even a person, not even an actor, is a contemporary painting of Joan of Arc up at
Okay.
some chapel in Wisconsin. And that's the closest likeness I've been able to find to Molly. And I wish I'd have to send it to you, Christina,
Mhm.
off this separately, obviously.
Yeah.
In terms of, yeah, Josiah, also hard call. Yeah, Josiah. Yeah, Molly's a brunette. Josiah
Mhm.
is what Molly's late mother called his hair is sunshine on dirt. Which, interestingly, entering into class, there's this amusing anecdote that Molly relates, is that when she was very little at the time when her mother said this, and thought that her mama meant that Josiah didn't take baths.
Uh-huh.
So this is like a recurring theme throughout the book,
Yeah.
that Josiah is very sensitive about anytime Molly, and of course he works as a sailor, so of course he
Yeah.
works a very stinky job.
Mhm.
Anytime Molly makes a comment about bathing, and turns
Right.
out he's very sensitive about it.
Well, I will say this. No one thought that they could find a Jamie Fraser, or a Claire for the Outlander series.
I know.
And Sam Hugan and Katrina Balfe have just knocked it out of the park. And so I think there's hope. I think they're out there. You just haven't run into them yet. So
Yeah.
I'll be praying that they do. And so speaking kind of books and movies and which have there been any in particular that have really inspired you on your journey towards holiness, kind of turning that page, not necessarily in your own
Mhm.
writing, but on your own journey towards sanctity? Are there any that you can kind of point towards? Mhm.
Oh, goodness. There's different books for different seasons.
Mm,
Um, and I would even say different saints for different seasons.
mhm,
So for me, goodness, I would say some of the most formative writing outside of scripture, probably the encyclicals of Benedict the 16th,
mm,
especially Space Salvi. I
mm,
love Space Salvi. It was very, very helpful for me. Um, let's see. The Catechism is very beautiful to read. Not straight through, but except the section on prayer actually can be read straight through, in my opinion.
mhm.
Um,
You're showing
the
your Dominican roots.
a little bit, yeah. Um, some other like really beautiful. I very recently read the letters of Elizabeth LeSueur. And
Yes.
I'm trying to think of the exact title of the Sophia Institute Press book gives it. But Elizabeth LeSueur, who
Yeah.
was a French laywoman whose husband was an atheist, militant atheist, and then she passed away. She offered up her sufferings,
Mhm,
and she passed away. And after his death, he became a Dominican friar.
mhm.
And interestingly, like he and Fulton Sheen knew each other. Somehow they were
Mm,
introduced to each other. Anyway, so this is the way that I learned about Elizabeth LeSueur is some sort of thread through Fulton Sheen talking about her on
mhm.
something with Fulton Sheen. I don't even know what
Right.
the context of it, but yeah. Elizabeth LeSueur. Um, I would say St. Catherine of Siena's, the biography written by Sigrid Undset, the
Mhm,
Nobel winning prize novelist. Undset herself was a third order Dominican, wrote a
mm.
beautiful biography of Catherine. And it reads like a novel because it was written by an
You're a
amazing
novelist.
novelist.
Yeah.
um, Definitely a lot of my Dominican readings, my Dominican formation is very, very important to me.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I could probably go on. It's hard for me to
Yeah.
name anything specifically because I feel like,
Mhm,
things come into the orbit and then there's a kind of a maturing process and then,
mhm.
okay, and then we're on to, okay, now
Right.
there's something else, or, there's something else that's feeding into my formation.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
but yeah, that's a good
absolutely.
question. Yeah.
So
In terms of now, I was gonna say I can speak specifically one thing specific to my writing vocation in terms of understanding holiness
mhm.
in that area is John Paul II's
Oh,
letter to
yeah.
artists.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's very good.
Oh, I mean, I have yet to run into anything by John Paul II that is not absolutely phenomenal. Might take that you have to take it sentence by sentence because it's so deep, but
Yeah.
it is phenomenal. So just one final question here for you. How do you think this work on the Molly Chase series, how has this helped you on your own journey towards holiness?
Mm. That is a great, great question. It has. There's certain things that are maybe more peripheral, on the peripheral, like just the discipline of writing and being consistent and seeing things to completion, or spending years practicing writing other stories and putting them in a desk drawer and never looking at them again. They could go up in fire for all I care. But like this is necessary. These are necessary things, toward becoming to practicing skill. And so there's those kind of peripheral things. Specifically with the Molly Chase series, though, is um, learning to write a love story, but also learning to write a man's point of view has been probably one of the best things for my marriage and also for my own personal healing.
Mhm.
And one of the things I give Molly in the book is I give her my biggest mistake.
Mm.
Not in detail. I mean, it's mostly
Mhm.
just the
Right.
this is Molly's story, not mine. This is not an autobiographical story, but I did give her um, a foolish mistake. And
Mhm.
it's one that it's similar in the same
Right.
vein as one that I had made.
Mhm.
And I think, the exploration of that, and then, I think in the process of learning how to deal with the consequences of that, but also to learn to forgive
Mm.
another person, to forgive oneself. Um, and then looking at the healing of that and saying, and this is how marriage can be part of that process of healing
Mm.
in many, many, many aspects of marriage.
Right.
So there's been a lot of really, I think this has been an exploration also in theology of the body. Like I said, it's been really good for understanding my husband. We would oftentimes, especially in the drafting of in pieces, I don't ask him as much now as I did then. But I would come to him and be like, okay, I've got this scene. It's from Josiah's point of view, and this is how it's playing out. And I'm just not satisfied with it. And he
Yeah.
would listen for a little bit, and then he would say, dude wouldn't do that.
Right.
A dude wouldn't do that. I was like, and I would get really
Yeah.
huffy and, walk
Mhm.
off. And then a half hour later, after I'd calmed down and, realized that he had maybe a perspective that I did not,
Mhm.
come back
Maybe.
to maybe I come back to that. All right, what
Mhm.
would a dude do?
Uh-huh.
So, so I mean, there was a lot of that,
Mhm.
uh, of looking through that. One of the things, and then also I think for me, also being really learning how to be honest, especially about human sexuality, learning to be honest on all fronts, not because the depiction, I actually don't enjoy writing physical intimacy at all.
Mhm.
I keep it the entire first book, we get through it without a kiss.
Right.
Nobody misses it, but
Mhm.
I managed to get out of it without a single kiss. And I am so proud of myself for that. Because nobody misses it. It's like, oh,
Right.
it's such a lovely story. I'm like, yeah, and you
Mhm.
didn't miss the thing that everybody sees as a requirement. Um, but to be honest about, Josiah is a very, very good man. But the
Mhm.
reason he's a good man is because he's in love with a girl at a very young age. And so it's kind of a stay. I mean, there's other reasons for it too. He is, but like at the same time, like also being realistic about these things and just having it there as like, we need to be realistic in
Mhm.
a day and age where this is the topic and this is the assumed thing and this is the God, especially, sex is people's idol.
Mhm.
Um, and that being very frank with ourselves about all of its dimensions, both good and bad, is actually very good formation for all of us. But also just even personally for me, it's like this was a place where there was some healing that needed to take place, and it through this writing and through thinking about the characters, I was able to bring a lot of healing for myself and also in my marriage. So I'm very grateful for it,
Awesome.
yeah.
I'm so glad, and I'm glad that there's going to be more. But where can people go to learn more about the book, your other work? Where can they go and find out?
So I do have a website, rhondaortiz.com. My name does have an H in it. So it's RHONDA, Ortiz, ORTIZ.com. And you can read about the series, find all my nonfiction stuff, if you dig deep enough into the website. um, and then also you could go to chrismpress.com, which is a publisher. They publish fiction from a Catholic and Orthodox Christian perspective, or from perspectives from Catholics and Orthodox Christians. It's a division of Whitefire Publishing, which is a Christian publisher. And yeah, those would be the first two places I would start, but I
Awesome.
mean, the book is available wherever books are sold,
Yeah.
so.
No, well, my suggestion is go out And if you haven't read In Pieces yet, go read it, and then you're ready to rock and roll with Adrift. And then we're going to be longingly counting the days until you had a very aggressive schedule there for having out the next 2 stories, in the next year and then the year after. And I'm going, wow, okay, I'm going to be praying for that.
Please do. Please do. There's, this is one of these things where you think, writers, man, writers. I had a baby between the publication of In Pieces and turning in my manuscript for Adrift. I had actually turned in a different story, a different version of Adrift earlier on, and it was not complete. And then I had a baby. I mean, I turned it in. Something was wrong with it. There was flaws, and I'm about to have a baby. I've got a belly out here. This is my,
Yep.
And in any case, had the baby, and then finally was able to rewrite Adrift. And so I'm actually a little bit behind as far as, series goes, but you can't rush art. So
No, you can't.
so we'll see. We'll see. There's a fine balance between art and meeting deadlines. We'll see.
That there is. And in the midst of that, God happens. So it's been beautiful journey so far, and I look forward to more adventures. But that all being said, any final words, for people in the sense of the journey, and especially as being a mom, you just were alluding to it. But is there been one particular habit or practice that's been key for you, to live out the life God created you for?
Yeah. Self-abnegation.
Okay, Dominican word, big word, got to explain.
Well, so you could say say a sacrificial living, but I'm going to actually put it in Dominican language, which is simplicity.
There you go.
If God has called you to something, and you've got a busy family life, and we all have a busy family. I mean, so many of us have busy family lives, and so we understand, right? It's like there are things like, and we're in the middle of summer vacation, right? I've got all my kids home. Like, there's no work happening with kids home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if God is asking and placing something on your heart and is continually confirming a vocation, then sometimes when you're a busy parent, the one and only way to make that happen is to, in the very small ways, little things, is being able to let go and say, I'm going to create some zones of silence in my life. I'm going to, whatever it might be, these little sacrifices really amount to creating space for God to work. And that has been, for me as a parent and for me as a writer, that has been absolutely key, is knowing when to say no to myself so that I'm leaving space for God to work.
Wow.
Not cluttering it up.
Leaving space for God to work. I love that. So it has been such a joy. I so enjoyed our conversation, Rhonda, and thank you again for your time, and also for your writing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, shoot, not at all. So everyone who's out there listening, I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, and know of my continued prayers that you're able to continue to do whatever it takes so that together we can tell the master of death, not today. God bless everybody.